Hey everyone, my name is Ryan H. Lewis, and today I want to talk to you about one of AWS's newest services, AWS CodeStar. CodeStar is essentially a collection of different existing AWS services, and it's the glue that kind of binds them all together. The services that it brings together are Code Commit, which is essentially a Git repository in AWS. Think of an AWS version of GitHub or GitLab. The next service is Code Build. And Code Build is sort of like Jenkins or Travis CI. It takes your code and builds it, runs some tests, potentially does some other steps, and then moves it on to the next step in the pipeline. Typically, the next step is getting that code to your server. And CloudFormation and Code Deploy are two services that are there for those purposes. Code Deploy is usually used when you need to get your code out to an EC2 instance, or maybe updating an Elastic Beanstalk stack. And CloudFormation is generally used for Lambdas. And inside CodeStar is Code Pipeline. Code Pipeline is basically the glue that builds all of these steps together. And with Code Pipeline, you're able to actually visualize each step that your code takes, from committing the code into Code Commit all the way to deploying it out with Code Deploy. With Code Pipeline, you can actually use a lot of different services like GitHub for your code repository. But CodeStar is making these decisions for you using all the AWS tools and bringing them together in a nice little package. Essentially, CodeStar is solving the problem of CI/CD. And actually, when they introduced CodeStar at AWS Summit a few weeks ago, that's how they positioned it, as a tool to solve the CI/CD problem that so many organizations and teams face. CI/CD isn't easy, and orchestrating from your code being checked in all the way to the deployment is a little bit difficult. For a while now, AWS has had all of these tools separately. Indeed, most of them actually launched a few years ago. But finally, CodeStar is bringing them all together. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of CodeStar and whether you should use it a little bit later. But first, let's talk about the pricing, because that's actually a very important thing. Unfortunately, there's not a single pricing scheme for CodeStar. Just like Elastic Beanstalk, CodeStar is free, but each of the underlying services have their own pricing models that you need to be aware of. First of all, Code Commit is free for the first 5 users. If you have more than 5 users, there is a cost associated with it. The Code Build pricing is one that's actually quite nice. Like other AWS services, with Code Build, you only pay for what you use. So when your code is building, you're paying AWS. But when your code isn't building, there's no service to manage, there's no instance running and idle. This means that Code Build could be considerably cheaper than running your own instance on EC2 of, say, Jenkins. Code Pipeline has a very simple pricing structure. It's $1 per pipeline. And if you're still in the AWS free tier, you get a free Code Pipeline every month. Finally, CloudFormation and Code Deploy are free services, but wherever you're hosting your application will have its normal prices associated with it. So now, with pricing aside, let's move on to the pros and cons. One of my favorite things about CodeStar is the new dashboard. It's simply awesome. It's got quick links to all the relevant services for your CodeStar pipeline. In addition, if you're running on something like a Lambda, it'll have links to the endpoint of your service. So in one dashboard, you're able to kind of see everything at once. Another pro of CodeStars is integrations. And at launch, there's only one, but I can see more coming down the pipe. The one that launched with CodeStar is with Jira. So you can use Jira for your issue tracking and link it up with a pipeline build running in CodeStar. Unfortunately, at this early stage, there are more cons than there are pros. And one of the first ones is the actual setup and getting started with CodeStar. You'd expect this new tool that really seems to focus on the user experience would have a very simple setup process. But one of the first things you have to do while you're setting up is doing some not so easy things in IAM, like setting up a role specifically for CodeStar and getting Git credentials for Code Commit. I can see these as huge roadblocks for beginners to get started and keep them from moving further on with the service. For enterprise users, it's a little bit different, because once you get into CodeStar, there's not many ways that you can configure it. AWS is taking a lot of liberties with this highly opinionated CI/CD workflow and basically keeping you captive in the AWS ecosystem. This wouldn't be that bad, except that some of their tools have some glaring problems. Code commit has one of the worst infractions that I have found, and that's the fact that there's no pull request or code review process in the tool itself. If you work in a large team or in an organization, you know that this is a showstopper for using code commit. And indeed, code commit, even though being launched a few years ago, has seemed to fail to catch on among many AWS users. Another grievance I found with code pipeline is the fact that I couldn't find any way to look up the history of my pipeline builds. You can view the current process, which is really nice, but if I wanted to see what it was a few days ago, see my successful pipeline builds versus my failed builds, I couldn't find a way to do that, which was a little disappointing. So bottom line, is CodeStar for you? Should you use it? Well, it depends on who you are. If you're a hobbyist, maybe an early adopter, or a single person trying to get some things running, CodeStar could be a good option. It has a very cheap pricing structure, and the complexity of what it does together may be difficult to achieve on your own. If you're running a smaller operation, I would say give it a shot, see if it works for your use cases. For enterprise users, it's a little bit different. The issues that I just mentioned make it really difficult for teams to use, and so I can see it not working for a lot of enterprises. AWS really has a great opportunity here. By fixing some of these small grievances, I could see them making CodeStar an essential tool for enterprises to use for their CI/CD workflows. And that's all I have to say about CodeStar. If you like this video or learned something new, I'd appreciate it if you gave the video a like. And do you have some thoughts or different opinions on CodeStar? I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. Finally, subscribe to my channel to keep up to date with all my new videos coming out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.